This episode is brought to you by Bayer Cropscience, weeding out uncertainty.
This proposal is for what's called a Keep Britain Growing loan, which would be a government-backed interest-free loan linked to the losses caused by drought or other crisis, and which would give farm businesses that are otherwise viable working capital to keep going and produce next year's food.
Could COVID-style crisis loans help farmers bounce back from this year's drought? As Bluetongue disease continues to spread, the message is vaccinate as soon as possible. China launches a huge food security drive, and who should pay for the drop in farm income when growers and livestock producers switch to regenerative farming? Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johan Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
A top story this week, farm leaders want the government to underwrite interest-free loans so farmers hit by drought and livestock disease can plant crops this autumn and replace livestock. The proposed Keep Britain Growing loan would help producers who face a cash flow crisis. Lincolnshire farmer Alex Godfrey is chairman of GB Potatoes. I caught up with him after an emergency meeting of industry leaders.
This is a response to the pressures that growers, as well as other farmers, find themselves under this year. For potato growers, two big pressures are coming from obviously the really dry weather that we've been experiencing in most of the country, and from the pressures on prices caused by the Iran crisis that's been going on for most of the year. So this proposal that's been issued today is for what's called a Keep Britain Growing loan, which would be a government-backed interest-free loan linked to the losses caused by drought or other crisis, and which would give farm businesses that are otherwise viable working capital to keep going and produce next year's food.
You're not asking for a bailout then, Alex. You're asking for the government to underwrite loans so you can invest in your business and pay that money back.
Absolutely, yeah. This loan will have to be repaid. It's about helping the sector through a difficult time that was outside anybody's control, and making sure that businesses are still here to grow in future years.
The NFU, Tenant Farmers Association, GB Potatoes and other organisations then working up these proposals for the government, yeah?
Well, I think we need to sort some more detail on this proposal, and various farming organisations are working together to make that happen. And then we will take the proposal to government and ask them for serious consideration. This is something that lots of businesses will really welcome, I'm sure, and the industry needs.
Some of our listeners, Alex, will be very familiar with potatoes as a crop. They'll be growers themselves. Others won't. Just paint a picture for us, if you will, of the sort of season that you've had. Potatoes are a high-value crop. They're also water intensive. They need a lot of water.
Yeah, that's right. So, potatoes are a high-value crop. We estimate that on average they require about 350 millimetres of water during the growing season, and that will come from a combination of water available to them in the soil, rainfall and irrigation. Obviously, rainfall has been in extremely short supply this year, and hardly anybody has irrigation capable of meeting that entire gap. So lots of growers do have some irrigation that will fill the gap, or part of the gap, but it's really hard work getting that on in the quantities that it's been required this year. And many growers haven't had access to sufficient water to be able to do that. And indeed, some growers are growing without irrigation at all. So there'll be a range of different experiences across the industry. So it will have a different impact on different growers. And it's very hard for us at the moment to know what the overall impact on the potato crop is going to be. But we know enough to know that it's highly likely to be a reduced yield on average.
That's Lincolnshire grower Alex Godfrey, chairman of GB Potatoes. Louise, these, they're like COVID bounce back loans, I guess. This Keep Britain Growing loan. We know growers and livestock producers are very much facing this cash flow crisis this coming autumn. This could really ease the pain and bridge the gap, so to speak.
Yes, if they get this off the ground, obviously we know it's needed, unfortunately, and that's a real shame. But if they get this off the ground, I think it will help some of these businesses. You know, it is such an exceptional time. We've talked about all of the pressures that some of these farm businesses are under at the moment, and then of course compounded by the current drought. So I think it's a good idea. I don't know enough detail about them at the moment because it's early days, but I'm hoping that these are going to be interest-free loans because we don't really want to be adding too much to the debt burden of any one particular business. The other thing I think I would say about these is that really, I'm not sure it can really end here. There's going to need to be other action too, and these loans should really just be part of a much bigger package, which sets out how these fantastic businesses can survive in these very difficult circumstances.
And we said last week that the £65 million announced by the government was anything but money now. £15 million for reservoirs and also an extra £50 million going into the sustainable farming incentive pot. This could bridge that gap.
Yes, it could do. I mean, you know, we've talked about the cash flow pressures that some of them are under. We know about the incredible amount of working capital that's needed now just to be able to farm. So, if we can get the money to these businesses sooner rather than wrapping it up in these other initiatives and schemes that the government's drought relief package did do, then I think that would be much better. But I think, as I said before, all of these things are needed at the moment. We need them as part of a much bigger package, which recognises the value that these farm businesses can bring, and it helps them just get back on their feet and operating at full capacity again.
Hugh, this is about the industry helping itself rather than going to the government cap in hand and asking for a bailout.
Yeah, no, look, it's a good idea, I suppose. If you can get if the most the government has to do is to underwrite some of the security on these loans and one thing and another, or sort of gently cajole the banks to look more favourably upon these loan cases, then that can only be a good thing, can't it? So look, it will potentially, assuming something comes out the end, it will potentially provide a stopgap in terms of cash flow aid and helping these farm businesses.
Well, it could be really useful for viable businesses that are struggling with cash flow going into the autumn. But do you think also it could just merely be delaying the inevitable for businesses that are perhaps really, really struggling?
Yeah, look, there's always, of course, that could happen. And I think the key thing is that if you almost need to bring a whole package of support again, don't you? In the sense that if you could lend someone the money just to get them through into this autumn, into next year or whatever, but at the same time they need to be asking the question: why are we in the situation we are now? Yes, there's drought. Yes, there's rubbish grain prices, although they are higher than they were this time last year. Yes, input costs have gone up, but ostensibly, what is the core operation of your business? And what is working and what isn't. And actually, you've got to rip the lid off. If you're in this situation, you need to rip the lid off and you need to look really hard. So it could be that, as well as the loans, there's a bit like they had the farm, they had the sort of help scheme, didn't they, the other year when they're trying to transition people and they offered free time with consultants. I mean, this is perhaps a level up. You need someone that's really going to look at it hard and help you look at it objectively, non-emotionally, and make tough business decisions. Because ultimately, what we don't want to be is in a situation in a year's time or 2 years' time where we're back to square one and we've got businesses that need more handouts to keep going. Or we change the policy completely and we go back to some form of universal farm support. It's make your mind up time. But I think in the short term, those businesses need the help and support financially, but they do need help and support in terms of asking the questions: what are you doing right and what are you doing wrong? And what can you change to make your businesses more resilient, not just environmentally, but financially?
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
The Farmers Weekly Autumn Drilling Update with Bayer Cropscience. Weeding out uncertainty.
And we're joined now by Rachel Banks from Bayer. Rachel, many growers will be conscious of input costs this season. If you are managing an arable farm with a limited spray budget, how would you plan an effective herbicide programme?
So the first thing I'd be looking at is field by field basis. You can't do the same programme across every single site. You need to look at what weeds are going to be your main concern and also what your abilities are in terms of sequencing. I would recommend every single person should be doing a sequence, coming back twice, especially if you've got difficult grass weeds. And it's really important in terms of where you put those chemistries, which order you go in, how late you push things, that you talk to people who've got experience in that. So whether it's us that we can give a lot of advice from a lot of the trials that we've managed, your agronomists on the ground who talk to us day to day, they'll be really good as well at doing that and helping to slot everything together in the best way for that specific field.
And that's going to be part of an integrated weed management approach. And in turn, Rachel, I guess that's going to maintain your long-term weed control.
Definitely. Using all of these different chemistries is really going to help control those specific weeds, and it is an integrated approach. You're also bringing in those cultural controls in there with it and, really working on putting the right chemistry in the right situation.
So the message from this week's autumn drilling update then, Rachel, is to use sequencing and, if you can, use R&D products. And they're products where some of the revenue goes back into developing and researching new products, future chemistry.
100%.
Rachel Banks from Bayer, thank you very much.
The Farmers Weekly Autumn Drilling Update with Bayer Cropscience. Weeding out uncertainty.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, the Bluetongue outbreak is spreading, with the latest figures showing over 500 cases now confirmed. The latest cases of the midge-borne virus have been detected in southwest Scotland, the Midlands and northern England. The Scottish Government has declared a temporary control zone in a bid to prevent the spread of the disease further north into Scotland. The message to producers with cattle and sheep from the government and farming organisations is vaccinate all susceptible stock as soon as you can. But with a shortage of vaccine, this is proving easier said than done. Earlier, Hugh caught up with Claire Wise, who's the acting National Livestock Chair at the NFU. He started by asking Claire about the current situation with the vaccine supply.
We've got some good news in as much as there should be 3 million doses landing by the time you have this out next week, Hugh. So, yeah, we've definitely had a period where it's been short, and I know a lot of people have got frustrated because they've been on waiting lists, but hopefully there's a bit of a light on the horizon and we've got a decent chunk of vaccine landing next week.
And the message presumably to everybody is to vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't just, a slightly unfortunate situation in the southwest, that we've got serious mortality going on. We've got immense amount of distress from the farmers and the animals down there. Please learn from what's going on down there and vaccinate your animals. I wouldn't want anybody else to be going through what they're going through down there right now.
And in terms of the modelling, what we're seeing or what APHA think is happening, there's a few cases obviously dotting up in Wales, up into Cheshire, sort of Peak District. Obviously, we've now seen some cases in southwest Scotland. Presumably, the midges are moving north.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really important for everyone to remember is when you look at that map, there is a time lag also on those cases. So there's actually a lot more cases that are being processed in the system a lot further north than is currently showing on that map. I mean, that's been an ask of mine from the beginning, that I think we should also have suspected cases on there so people can be more aware of when it gets to your area. Don't look at that map and think, oh, it's not come to me yet. It'll, if it's not there already, it's certainly on the way.
And on the testing, I mean, is there any point, do you think, still testing in the real hotspot area in the southwest? I mean, it's unfortunate and it's terrible if people have it on their farm. The testing presumably would be better deployed elsewhere.
I think there's two parts to that, isn't there? I mean, I think any vet down there now should be able to do a differential diagnosis to know that this is Bluetongue, and they can do that not necessarily by going through the APHA testing. So I think, yes, that would definitely free up resource for other areas as it goes up the country, as other hotspots are developing, to redeploy that APHA resource there and get that testing there. But the second part of that is what I don't want is that those farmers are left behind relying on private testing to be paying for that. We have to make sure this is a level playing field. So however you are testing, let's make sure the farmers aren't taking that burden cost-wise. But in terms of resource and men on the ground and ladies on the ground, yes, they do need to be moved north now.
And in terms of the testing that is going on, the delay on the testing that's going on is quite worrying, is it not? Given that, okay, it's a few hundred cases or 500-600 submissions. It's less than 1,000 probable, even if it is 1,000 submissions. Does it worry you that APHA resource is so stretched that it's taking 2 to 3 weeks to turn around these test results? And potentially we've got another AI season, avian influenza season, generally tends to kick off around October time. Presumably the Bluetongue is going to be pushed out the lab.
Yeah, I mean, I think turnaround time at the moment is just under 2 weeks. And I'll be fair to APHA, a chunk of that is things such as Royal Mail getting the test in time. But the reality is that is still too long. And if this was a contagious, animal to animal disease, we don't have any time to spare in those situations. So it's a constant conversation, if I'm honest, at the moment here with my poultry colleagues about what do we do going forward, because we are not prepared if any two such situations like that hit at once. And it's a message that the NFU and other organisations such as got to be getting louder and stronger, I believe, every day on.
For next year and people just health planning, I mean, it brings the whole necessity to do proper health planning on farm and risk assessment, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And what I would say to everybody is, wake up on the 1st of January and ask yourself, when am I vaccinating for Bluetongue this year? I don't think we can afford to leave this into spring, leave this into early summer. It's going to be back with us next year. Let's get on and do it. But I mean, all of this demonstrates, doesn't it, that having those conversations with your vet and assessing what are the risks in your area every single year is such an important part of protecting your flock and your herd. So have those conversations early. Bluetongue, yes, definitely talk about that, but also look at what else you might be at risk on in your area. And just, if you can vaccinate for things, it's so much easier than, trying to sort it out at the other end.
That's Claire Wise of the NFU. Now, Mandy Neville is the head of animal health at AHDB and said it's not too late to vaccinate, even in badly affected areas.
If you haven't vaccinated, it's not too late to vaccinate. And we are hearing that farms that are vaccinating, even when disease has started to appear on their farms, it's having an impact. So speak to your vet, get your vaccine ordered as soon as you can. There are challenges with vaccine supply. It's flying off the shelves as soon as it's coming in from the continent. So actually trying to manage that is one of the areas that we've been working on with the vaccine manufacturers and with the VMD to make sure that there is as much vaccine available as possible.
That's Mandy Neville from the AHDB talking to Hugh, and before her, Claire Wise from the NFU. Hugh, this disease, this virus is spreading. We knew it was going to, I guess, but it's a far, far worse situation than it was just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, we could see that pattern developing last week before. Obviously, as you heard Claire say in the audio, the mapping shows is in a bit of time delay because they're struggling to do this. It's taken them 2 weeks to process these samples on average when they go in. We know there's huge numbers in the southwest. Looking at the map now, there's another dozen or 8 or a dozen cases appeared through sort of Derbyshire, across into Cheshire, Manchester. Looks like there's one just popped up as we're recording this on the sort of North Yorkshire, which is worrying. And now there's a case confirmed at Carlisle. And then obviously there are 6 cases we know about that are confirmed in southwest Scotland. And as we're recording this, Scottish Government have just put in an RZ, a restricted zone across the whole of southwest Scotland, which means that animals can't move out of that zone into the rest of Scotland unless they are vaccinated. They've not made it abundantly clear whether you can move from the RZ in Scotland to effectively England or Wales, which is all one massive RZ. That hasn't been made abundantly clear, but you'd like to think that would be the case. However, the joy of devolution, who knows what the answer is that, but hopefully that is the case. So yes, it is becoming more widespread. And there's probably cases that aren't being reported and people are just getting on with it. It's a big problem.
And Louise, this virus, as it's spread, it is causing an immense amount of stress and anguish for farmers as well. It is almost a farmer welfare problem as well as an animal health problem.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's causing an enormous amount of stress and anxiety. Of course, you have to remember that many of these livestock farms have already been dealing with the effects of the drought, so they've had that to contend with, and now suddenly this disease. So it's really causing them. Yeah, there's anger out there as well. I think I should probably say that. The time delays that Hugh mentioned, they are just adding to the way that they're feeling and the concern and the worry. Interesting, I think, to see that the Addington Fund, the charity, they have announced some emergency grants. So you can apply for those. They are because of both Bluetongue and the drought. So you can apply for those. If you go onto their website, they can get some funds to you if that's what you need. Otherwise, I think everyone's just really got to support each other. Hugh's message, the vaccination message hasn't changed, has it? It's been there since the beginning. So that is really what's going to happen. I was pleased and relieved to hear there are another 3 million, I think you said, Hugh, vaccines arriving next week. So they can push on with that. They need to push on with that. But in the meantime, I think we've just got to be aware of the huge amount of upset that this is causing.
Hugh, the peak is yet to come. Once we get past that, there is hopefully going to be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel through the winter.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, potentially, if it peaks out, but it comes back to this message of vaccination. And if people are listening to this with susceptible stock that they have not vaccinated, and particularly if they're in one of the hotspot areas now up the west side into Cumbria, up into southwest Scotland, and you haven't asked your vet and you haven't ordered vaccine, then please do, because it's a bit like the drought, isn't it? Everyone's talking the drought to death, and hopefully, because we've talked it to death so much, yes, it's had a massive impact. We know that, but it's caught. It starts raining, and then in the peeing rain, everyone forgets about drought planning until it happens the next year. And what we've absolutely got to ensure is that if you've got susceptible stock, you get that vaccine into your health plan. So this does not happen again next year, because it would be utterly ridiculous if this happened again next year and we, in other parts of the country. And at the moment, the order books past, say, September, October for the vaccine companies will look pretty lean because people aren't thinking about it. But we need to get those orders in now, whether they get the vaccines in now or we've just got to keep this momentum on. Because, yes, there will be a peak in this current cycle as the temperature wanes and the CT, the level of virus circulating in the midges, will decline as temperatures drop. But it'll still be, that's how we saw it move from Kent to Dorset and Devon. It just rolled very quietly. So it'll be rolling round. Then it could roll round the rest of the UK over a very mild autumn, not cause too many clinical issues. And then come next next summer, if the temperatures spike again, we're back to square one. So vaccination is absolutely key. People just need to get on it. There are no excuses. You just need to get it done.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by a message to 88440. Louise, harvest over in your neck of the woods. I know you're still following developments there, but from the farm office rather than out in the field, but still continuing right up north.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've been catching up with, various people, both growers and people in the trade. We know, don't we, the yield story really. Yields are down this year, but then there is this massive amount of variability across farms, and that's related to soil type as much as anything else, I think. Spring barley is looking particularly weak. From what I've heard from people this week anyway. So it would be great if people can tell me that story is different and they've had a very good year with spring barley. that's just people getting to grips with how things have performed this year, knowing that they're then going to have to make their decisions or about what goes in the ground this autumn. Cultivation strategies are causing some real head scratching because it is very difficult for people to know what to do. Do you untouch it, just leave it as stubbles for now and wait for some rain? Or do you just create clouds of dust because you think it's too risky leaving all of that until September? So, as I said, head scratching going on about that. And then in the meantime, while we're waiting for rain and while things are moving on, hopefully, there are these SFI applications to go in because we know that the September window is coming up, but we don't know the actual date when that opens yet. We also know, of course, that this extra 50 million has gone into the SFI. So really, you've got to be ready to go. So people are in their offices making sure these applications are ready, because I think all of that money will just disappear in 24 hours. I really do. So, that is occupying people's minds, making sure that they've got every chance of getting an agreement through and approved. And, especially on the arable farms that I speak to, that's going to be really important cash flow for the coming year.
And coming back to what we were talking about earlier, Hugh, we know cash flow is a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, it is a huge issue. We know that on lots of farms, and it's becoming more so as the reality of the harvest on many arable farms is coming to bear now in terms of what isn't in the shed and what needs to go out of the bank account. And it's really tough for a lot of farm businesses I speak to at the moment. It's tough across all sectors. I mean, at least values are, certainly in the livestock sector, values are still half reasonable, but it's the usual thing, costs of everything going up, yada, yada, yada. But again, it's back to having some certainty on some of those support schemes, isn't it, to really help those numbers. So, it is tough.
Yeah, tough, and certainly with implications for food security. And as the impact of the harvest comes to bear on cash flows this autumn, other countries are taking food security seriously, very seriously indeed, Hugh, in the case of China in the news this week.
Yeah, there's an article in this week's Daily Telegraph, which was basically saying, China has this plan. They realise that their Achilles heel for so many years, and we see that, don't we, in the markets, how it works, has been that they don't have enough, or they haven't been able to grow enough food. Something like only 8% of China is actually farmland. The rest of it's sort of hill and rock or desert. But they've basically announced in the last few weeks this plan to effectively, they ideally want to be self-sufficient. And in some ways, that's quite a worrying thing from a geopolitical point of view, because if China was completely self-sufficient and didn't have to rely, for example, on America for huge amounts of soy and indeed South America for huge amounts of beef and soy, and, they buy loads of pork products of us that are brilliant. You sort of, in the back of your mind, you're sort of thinking, if they're really self-sufficient, that could be a bit worrying, couldn't it? Because they could just do what they want with the world and they would have there'd be no comeback, would there? And I think one of the things that keeps, I don't know, perhaps it's a simplistic Surrey farmer viewpoint, but I think one of the things that keeps the world order sort of, look, it's not easy at the moment. We know there's loads going on. But certainly when you look at that China relationship, is the fact that their economy needs us to trade and buy all the useful stuff that they make and they sell in budget warehouses here that we go and buy from DIY shops and all the clothes and everything else, iPhones, cars, you name it. But also the fact they're reliant on the rest of the world for their own, for quite a lot of their food stocks. So it's an interesting point of view. Whether they'll actually manage to achieve it, one of the big areas that they're accelerating massively in is fermentation of proteins to replace meat as such. And we've already seen, one of the big impacts on the New Zealand dairy market over the last couple of years has been China's increase. Their self-sufficiency has gone from something like 60-something percent, 62, 63% to about 78%, their dairy self-sufficiency in just 3 or 4 years by harnessing, modern genetics that we'd see as normal genetics over here and really pushing efficiencies. So it's one to watch that. It's a huge story and one that would have a massive impact across global agricultural markets if it were to evolve over the next couple of decades.
Well, certainly something to watch then, Hugh, especially with China being such a global player when it comes to, well, pretty much everything, if not agriculture. Those markets you mentioned, keeping a close eye on those too. What are they doing here this week?
Thank you, Johan. Finished steer deadweight actually edges back 0.1 of a penny, 609.6. The live weight goes up about 4 pence, 345.8. To the sheep rigs, pretty much stands on. In fact, it does stand on. The SQQ on lambs, 723.5, exactly the same as last week. The live weight SQQ is 317.7. That's dropped back about 13p on the week. And actually, it's dropped below what it was this time last year on that live weight price, because it was 327.1 last year. On to the pig price. That has grown again. So some good news in the world of pigs, albeit a very modest, what has it done? About 1.2 pennies. So it's 179.5, the SPP price. On to the arable markets, and there is a bit of a jolt on some of these, which is a good jolt. Feed wheat, which is probably a hangover from the stuff we talked about last week when all of that shenanigans went on in the Black Sea and they started bombing grain terminals, and it kicked a lot of the global markets. It put like a 20, 30 quid spike in. Some of that's come back, but there are still some gains there now that the dust has settled. Feed wheat 194.9. That is up exactly £10 and 10p on the week. And if you see, you're an arable farmer and you're feeling poor and you've had a terrible drought year, and you say the price is terrible, but you know, a year ago that feed wheat price was £161.40. On what was equally a rubbish harvest. So at least you're getting that little bit more for it, 30 odd quid more. But of course, everything else costs more money. But anyway, that's an aside. Milling wheat, 205.7. That's gained 5 quid on the week. And again, if we look back a year ago, milling wheat was spotting in at 181.7, 181.70. Feed barley, 162.10. That has dropped back a couple of quid. Oilseed rapes gained a fiver, 444.60. Feed peas 206.1's gained 3 quid. Feed beans 227.8. That's gained a massive £7 on the week. To the diesel tanks, and it's a real mess now, isn't it? The oil market, the crack split is causing diesel prices to go up. Because of all that's going on in the Middle East, because the Ukrainians are bombing a whole load of Russian refineries, which means that the people that buy their diesel off Russia can't, and so they're probably buying the stuff that we would buy, et cetera, et cetera. So diesel has gone up another 2 pence, basically 99.48, up from 97.72. And to really depress you, this time last year, it was 65.7 pence a litre.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, who should pay for the drop in farm income while growers and livestock producers switch to regenerative farming? Should it be the farmer, or should it be the big food companies encouraging farmers to adopt regen methods? It's a question posed by a new report called Risk to Reward. It's published by the Allerton Project using figures from Anderson's Farm Business Consultants and funded by food company Nestlé. The report highlights the deficits of up to £80 per hectare during an initial 5-year transition, arguing that the financial case for regen is difficult for farmers to justify alone. Well, earlier, Louise caught up with Joe Stanley, Head of Sustainable Farming at the Allerton Project.
So, Joe, this is a real show me the money moment, isn't it? I mean, what we can see is the drop in profitability as farms make the changes that are needed to move to a regenerative system. These farms aren't even breaking even, are they?
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece of work that's been commissioned by Nestlé, Louise, and the modelling that you're referring to. You know, we're talking about 3 arable farms, sort of 600 hectare arable farms in the east of England on different soil types. As you say, look, what this report kind of demonstrates is that when we're moving beyond those kind of fundamental, what is regen ag, and will regen ag help to build soil health and resilience over the longer term? If we then actually look what that looks like from a farm business economics point of view, and I think this is where we're often lacking as a sector, isn't it? That we're actually able to point to data to actually say, well, what does this mean for my business? Then, as you say, Louise, what this report does demonstrate is that on both on a loam farm, on a sand farm, on a clay farm, in this predominantly arable setting, yes, there is a reduction in farm business profitability from pure farming operations over the 5-year transition period that we are modelling. And what that's obviously demonstrating, as you say, is that ultimately there is a funding gap there, and on pure farming terms, where are those farm businesses that are responding to government and to market conditions? Where are those businesses going to find the money to plug that reduction in profitability over that transitional period?
Now, we're quite used to hearing, aren't we, that, there's a bit of a yield drop when you start to change your system. But actually, in this situation, we're looking at 5 years, and the financial picture isn't really changing, is it? I mean, the Lightland farm in this report is losing up to £80 a hectare by the end of that time. Does it really change at the end of year 5? Do we know any more about that?
Let's step back a second. What does this transition look like? Now, what we've modelled is a relatively modest regenerative transition. So we're talking about reducing intensity of cultivations, introducing cover and catch crops, introducing sort of grazing livestock into that system. And again, all in the absence of any sort of external support. And you're quite right to flag that the sand farm especially is looking at sort of a roughly sort of 20% reduction in income per hectare as a result of that. Now, that is particularly acute for the Lightland farm because we're looking at some additional costs associated with that, such as growing catch crops as well as cover crops. And again, without any support to do that, we're looking at the impact of reduced cultivations on a sugar beet crop that you might naturally find within that Lightland site. So yes, for those reasons, the yield impact is especially significant on the sand farm. But actually, looking at the report as a whole, the yield impact, especially on the loamy and the heavy clayland site, is actually not modelled to be that significant. But what we do look at in this report is sort of the total, that sort of, if you like, the net position as a result of adopting those regenerative practices. So obviously, there are going to be some savings associated with that. So, for example, around machinery depreciation, as you're getting rid of some of those stocks of older machinery and replacing them with perhaps lower horsepower, or replacing them with a smaller number of machinery. But you are also looking at additional costs, things like not selling all of your straw. So we've modelled that much of the straw in these systems will now be returned to the land. Of course, that's a lost income stream. Now it's adding benefits to your soil health, of course, but it is reducing the income for the business. So when we start looking at all of these things, it's not just about the yield drop. It's around actually what are the costs as well as the savings in that transition, in that initial, as we've modelled, 5-year period. And the net position is that actually there is a more challenging situation to be faced for those farm businesses going through that transition. But of course, what we then stress in this report is what we're then seeing is an improvement in finances towards the end of the transition period. And what we would hope to see, if we were to move into year 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, is that we would see the benefits of that regenerative transition embedded within the farm business and greater profitability going forward. Now, of course, the big question is, how do you help fund that transitional period? Because especially where market conditions are at the minute, 5 years is a long time.
That's Joe Stanley talking earlier to Louise. So Louise, Joe Stanley there from the Allerton Project, talking about this report commissioned by Nestlé, a company that has this ambitious goal of wanting to source 50% of the food it processes from regenerative farms by 2030.
Yeah, they've got that target. They've got that goal. They have publicly stated that. So I think this report actually is therefore really, really important because it models the impact of a 5-year transition, move to a regenerative system on 3 arable farms, which are then on 3 different soil types. So they're looking at what this means for those farms. And actually, over that 5-year period, the financial picture is negative. So that is a bit of a concern, really. For these farms, it's difficult to justify the transition on its own financial merits. Or certainly for that 5-year period, that's a very challenging time for them. And then, of course, if we think about what's happened this season and we think about climate change and drought and what have you, you can see how much that is adding to that challenge. So, yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting report. I'm sure it's given them, reason to really stop and think. And of course, while this report was being sort of digested and understood by them, Nestlé did actually come out, if you remember, in the summer with a partnership with Wild Farmed. So what they're doing there is putting regeneratively grown wheat into the Kit Kats that they make in the UK. So they're made up at their York factory, and they're saying that 51% of the wheat used in these Kit Kats now comes, via the Wild Farm network of growers. So, they are, if you like, putting their money where their mouth is, in that they've committed to do that, and they are sourcing these ingredients a bit differently. But it's a very interesting report. The arable sector particularly is facing some key challenges at the moment, and it's reeling right now from the sort of combination of factors, whether that's the very poor harvest or rising costs. So I think, they're going to have to decide what they do here. If they're going to continue sourcing these sorts of ingredients, then any short-term thinking has really got to be pushed out of the way, and they're going to have to think about how they can more evenly share the risk with these farmers. That, I think, comes across very strongly.
There you go, Hugh. A key message then. The risk has to be shared, and really and truly the supply chain has to play its part in doing that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the supply chain obviously needs to share the risk. I suppose some people in the supply chain might also turn around and say, well, would you like to share my risk of employing all these thousands of people in this multi-million-pound factory that I've invested in, that I have to run day to day and turn over hundreds of millions and make a very small margin? Now, that I know is going to get a lot of farmers throwing rocks at the radio, but the reality is that is a fact of life. So there does need to be a share of the risk. I think what it actually needs to be, yes, you need to share the risk, but equally you need to be more transparent. Because I think if farmers, realised the risk that some of these larger companies take. Now, the big difference is that many of them, I suppose, are huge multinationals. And you could argue, well, they should take the risk because they make billions and they turn over trillions. But equally, I think transparency is actually the key, because if you get transparency, then people can see who's taking what risk, where, why, and when. And also transparency on what, a farmer doing a certain action with a product, whether that's growing a cow or growing a wheat plant, a farmer doing that, if he or she does that action, what value does that bring at the retail end? Where's that transparency? So you can then say, well, fine, I'll do that action, but it's adding 15% to your sale price. So it should add, 2 or 3% to my sale price off the farm, appreciating that you've got to spend X billion moving it from the farm through your big factory and back out to the retailer again. So I think it's I don't think it's as simple as, say, just sharing the risk. I think the key thing here is transparency.
Well, transparency, sharing the risk. Louise, I think some of our listeners at least will be thinking that companies like Nestlé are going to have to be putting their hand in their pocket to fund this transition if they want food grown using regenerative farming methods.
Yeah, they are going to think that. And I think we also need to recognise that, of course, Nestlé have worked with, say, First Milk for really quite some time now. So they are familiar with this sort of type of partnership and how to work with farmers and growers. The other thing that Nestlé do is they also work with LENS, which is the Landscape Enterprise Network Scheme. So what that does is that pools the money from various companies together and it co-funds regenerative solutions for landscape resilience. So what they try and do with that scenario is to protect a whole sourcing region, if you like. So Nestlé have got their Purina pet food plants in East Anglia. So that's why they've put some money into LENS to help with that. So they are doing it. I suppose the question for me is it enough money, given what this report shows us, or certainly for the arable farmers? And is it coming through fast enough to really help farmers who are making this transition? And I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but I think it's well worth having a good read of it, because we've got, both the current economic climate in farming, and then, of course, we've got the climate change situation. So it's really giving it some focus now.
Well, there you go. Some food for thought, as always, here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. We will put a link to that report on the show notes page of this episode. Do have a read of it. Let us know your thoughts. Email us podcast@fwi.co.uk, or if you're in the UK itself, text the word farm followed by a message to 88440. That is it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do, as always, leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johan Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by Bayer Cropscience, weeding out uncertainty.